That night is burned into my mind. The night I lost my friends. It was just supposed to be a thrill. You know, the kind you take for the story afterward. This idea to check out the old death house up on the hill. People swore it was cursed. No one who went in came out the same. Some never came out at all. The place looked like something from a horror movie, with sagging walls, broken windows, and a heavy, eerie silence that swallowed everything. We stepped inside, and the air turned cold immediately, thick with this damp, rotten smell. The floors creaked under us, and the dust lay so thick, it was like no one had set foot inside for years. Nick, being Nick, led the way, waving his flashlight around like he owned the place. Sarah and Emily stuck close to me, both of them tense and jumpy. But I could feel it too, that prickling feeling like someone was watching us. But the second we crossed the threshold, every single phone died. The flashlights, too, started dimming. It felt like the house itself was breathing, like it had been waiting. Then, somewhere upstairs, we heard a scratching sound, low and steady, like nails dragging across wood. Nick smirked, saying it was probably a raccoon or something, but his hands were shaking. Against every bit of instinct screaming in me, we headed up. The sound got louder, echoing down the dark hallway. We turned a corner, and there, at the end of the hall, was a door, barely open, just enough to see a bit of shadow leaking out. Nick pushed the door wider, and we stepped inside. The room was lit only by the weak moonlight streaming through a broken window. Strange symbols covered the walls, drawn in something dark and sticky. My stomach twisted as I realized it looked like blood. And then I noticed the mirror. It stood in the corner, tall and covered in cracks. But in the glass, I saw something move. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light. But the shadow in the mirror twisted, and then I saw a face. Twisted, pale, with hollow eyes, staring back at us. It pressed its hands against the glass, scratching at it, desperate to get out. I wanted to move, but I was frozen in place, paralyzed by terror. And then, with a shattering sound, the glass cracked open, and the thing stepped out. It looked human, but wasn't. Its limbs were long and twisted, its skin gray and sagging, eyes deep black pits. It lunged at Nick first, moving fast, wrapping its thin bony fingers around his throat and lifting him like he weighed nothing. Nick's face went pale, his hands clawing at its arm, but there was nothing he could do. I heard a sickening snap as his neck broke, and he crumpled to the floor, lifeless. Sarah screamed, stumbling backward, but the thing was already moving toward her, sliding across the floor in this sick, fluid motion. She turned to run, but it grabbed her by the ankles, dragging her back as she kicked and screamed. Her fingers clawed at the floor, leaving bloody streaks as it pulled her closer to the mirror. She looked back at me, her face twisted in terror, begging for help, but before I could even move, she was gone, swallowed by the darkness and the glass. Emily and I were the only ones left. We ran, stumbling down the hallway, my heart pounding so loud it drowned out everything else. Every door we passed slammed shut, trapping us, forcing us toward the stairs. When we reached the top, the whole house seemed to shift, like the walls were bending in, closing off any way out. We reached the front door and threw ourselves against it, but it wouldn't budge. Emily was crying, her hands bleeding from where she'd clawed at the wood, but there was no escape. I turned around, and the thing was there, standing at the end of the hall, watching us with those hollow eyes. It grinned, lips pulling back over jagged rotting teeth, and started moving toward us, slow and deliberate, savoring every second. Emily tried to push me out of the way, screaming for me to run, but it was too late. The thing lunged at her, wrapping its fingers around her face, pulling her close. She struggled, but it was like fighting a shadow. I watched as it forced her face toward the mirror, her terrified reflection staring back. She screamed, this horrible high-pitched sound that I still hear in my nightmares. And then, she was gone. Just like that. No sound, no trace, just an empty room. I was the last one. The thing turned toward me, its head tilting, almost curious. I stumbled back, pressing myself against the wall, my chest heaving as I tried to breathe. I knew I was next. I knew there was no way out. It stepped closer, raising its hand, reaching for me. The cold from its fingers seeped into my skin, spreading through my veins like ice. The last thing I saw before everything went dark was my own reflection in the mirror, my face twisted in terror, trapped forever in that cursed glass. I felt its cold fingers tighten around my wrist, and everything went black for a moment, like I'd been ripped out of my own body. But then I opened my eyes and found myself standing in the dark, staring at the same hallway, only now it was twisted and warped, like I was looking through a distorted lens. I turned, and there they were, my friends, but they weren't the same. Nick's head hung at an unnatural angle, his neck broken, his face twisted into an empty, horrified stare. Sarah's eyes were wide, her mouth open in a silent scream, her hands stretched out toward me, frozen mid-reach. Emily stood there, too, her face a mask of terror, her skin pale and gray, her hands reaching for me in desperation. They moved slowly, jerkily, like puppets on strings, their eyes hollow and lifeless, staring right through me. I tried to scream, to run, but it was like I was frozen in place, my own body out of my control. And then I felt it. The thing, sliding into me, filling up every part of my mind, sinking into my thoughts, my memories. I was no longer in control. I could feel it taking over, pushing me to the back, locking me inside my own mind. I was a prisoner in my own body, watching through my own eyes as it looked around, as it grinned, using my face, my mouth. It forced me to turn back to the mirror, and that's when I saw myself, hollow, empty, my own reflection, staring back with those same dark, empty eyes. I watched, helpless, as it made me lift my hand to wave, and in that moment, I realized I was the new lure. Just like whoever it had possessed before, I was now part of its trap, a twisted figure to draw in the next group of curious fools. And so I stand, night after night, waiting in that darkened house, trapped behind my own eyes, unable to speak, or scream, or beg. I wait, forced to watch as new faces come into the house, drawn by that same hunger for a thrill. I can't warn them. I can't save them. All I can do is watch as it pulls them in, one by one, consuming them, trapping them in the mirror, their faces joining the others. I am just another hollow figure in the glass, waiting,